And now Neil Salowitz will introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Byron. Good morning to all of you here and those of you who are joining us on Zoom. My name is Neil Salowitz. I first met Mark Stringer in 2006 when I attended the wedding of my friends Denny and Patrick at the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines, where Mark was the senior minister. This was before marriage equality had found its way into Iowa law. In 2007, Mark had the honor of officiating at Iowa's first legally recognized same-sex wedding. Following his 16-year tenure at the church, Mark became the executive director of the ACLU of Iowa in May of 2017. Mark has been a leader in Central Iowa in several capacities, including serving as the founding board chair of Project Iowa, a mid-Iowa organizing strategy, or AMOS, instigated 21st century workforce development initiative. He's also been involved as a board member of the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, including 2 terms, or rather 2 years as chair. And in 2012, the Interfaith Alliance honored Mark with its Faith and Freedom Award. Since its founding in 1935, the ACLU of Iowa has protected the basic freedoms of everyone in our state, no matter who they are or what they believe. It's a private, nonpartisan organization that fights to advance civil liberties and to uphold the Iowa and U.S. constitutions. It is the state affiliate of the National American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU of Iowa works in the courts, in the Iowa legislature, and through public education and advocacy to assure the rights of everyone in Iowa, from atheists to devout Christians, from labor unions to business people, and more, to make sure that the constitutional rights of everyone are preserved. Please join me in welcoming Mark Stringer.
Good morning. Really good to be here. So whenever I tell folks or give folks an overview of our work, of our Iowa affiliate, it's difficult to know where to begin and where to end because our work is so broad in scope and can be so particular in its detail. But I will lead us to some highlights of where we are now by thinking about where we've been, where even I have been. The first time I spoke to the First Friday Breakfast Club was in 2007. Just 2 months earlier, as Neil alluded to, in my role as a UU minister, I had enjoyed the honor and privilege of officiating that first legally recognized same-sex wedding in Iowa history in the front yard of my Des Moines Drake neighborhood home, actually. Many forget that before the Iowa Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of marriage equality in 2009, there was one couple who had already been legally recognized. In a short window of time between when Polk County Judge Robert Hansen ruled that to deny marriage licenses to same-sex couples was unconstitutional and later issued a stay on his ruling, one enterprising couple, Iowa State students Sean Fritz and Tim McQuillan, were able to secure a waiver of the 3-day waiting period and found me to officiate their wedding in a hasty dash before the window of opportunity closed. So for nearly 2 years, Sean and Tim's marriage that I officiated, with cameras filming me because it was a big deal then, documenting that short ceremony, that awkward ceremony, was the only legally recognized marriage in Iowa until the Iowa Supreme Court did rule unanimously in favor of marriage equality in 2009. Both of these events, and why I talk about them this morning, created some of my most treasured memories of living in this state. That wedding in my front yard, the unanimous ruling of the Supreme Court, I felt like I belonged in Iowa. I moved here in 2001 and I was home. We were on the right path. Well, it's worth noting, too, that the first marriage equality case the ACLU of Iowa brought was in 1976. So it had been a long journey. The last time I spoke to this group was in 2017. I was just a few months into starting at the ACLU. And I spoke then about our court challenge of one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country at the time. a law that sought to require a medically unnecessary and frankly insulting 72-hour waiting period and second doctor's visit before any Iowan could obtain an abortion. That case ended up making it all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court a year later, where we prevailed, with the court finding that the Iowa Constitution protected abortion as a fundamental right, requiring strict scrutiny if anybody wanted to overturn it. The highest hurdle a law would have to pass to be upheld in our legal system. At that time, that was more protection here in Iowa than the federal undue burden standard established by Roe v. Wade and affirmed in Casey. I also told you back in 2017 about a new lawsuit we had filed against the Iowa Department of Corrections on behalf of a transgender client named Jesse Vrew, who, while working as a state employee, had been denied use of the men's restrooms and locker rooms, and who had been denied equal access to medical care. That case concluded just last April, with the Iowa Supreme Court upholding a previous jury verdict, finding that Vrew was indeed discriminated against in healthcare coverage and that it was illegal employment discrimination to ban Jesse from using the men's restrooms and locker room at work, just like all his other male coworkers. This was a historic victory for civil rights in Iowa because it made real the promise of non-discrimination protections in employment that our legislator put in place for transgender Iowans in the Iowa Civil Rights Act in 2007. I share these stories to point out that not only does the ACLU play the long game, taking challenging, groundbreaking impact cases that may not always succeed at first, but that can take many years to unfold toward resolution, but that resolution that is reached is sometimes for better or for worse, not the end of the story. As Max has already alluded to, there have been a shocking number of bills introduced this legislative session that target LGBTQ Iowans. Some say 29, some say 33, depends on how you count. As Max alluded to, among them is a bill that would begin the process of trying to end marriage equality in Iowa, which has been the law of the land for nearly 14 years, and a bill that would eliminate gender identity from the Iowa Civil Rights Act, which has been the law for more than 15 years, and which was the basis on which we won the Jesse Vrew case. I wonder why the legislature might be wanting to remove that protection. While these bills may not be enacted and probably won't, not now, the fact that they were introduced at all is deeply concerning and a sign that all fair-minded Iowans need to stay vigilant when protecting and defending the rights of our neighbors, especially LGBTQ rights, especially when too many in the legislature seem hell-bent on punching down on a minority population, inflicting a narrow, ideological, unjust, and often unconstitutional worldview that is not compatible with the liberties that the majority of Iowans have come to prize and the rights that we should want to maintain. A ban on gender-affirming care for minors, which I understand progressed deep into the night last night. I got an email at 1:38 in the morning. So that has advanced out of funnel, I understand. Restrictions on how the lived realities of LGBTQ people can even be mentioned in a public school classroom, much less discussed. Book banning, on and on. The last week was one of the most disturbing, troubling weeks I have ever experienced in this state. So I go from elation to be an Iowan to embarrassment. Many of these dangerous, ill-advised bills, if enacted, would eliminate parents' abilities to rely on school personnel to help their child with any matters related to gender identity issues and distress, questions, or treatment. Given the young age at which gender identity issues tend to arise and the specific vulnerabilities of these young people, including inclination towards self-harm and depression, these bills are horrific. This is our legislature doing this. We hear a lot of talk about parental choice in Iowa, don't we? But what about the parents of some of the most vulnerable public school children? Parents who trust that schools will keep their kids safe and alive. we must do all we can to not let these parents and children down by supporting One Iowa, by supporting Iowa Safe Schools, by showing up, by speaking out. And when it comes to reproductive rights in Iowa, the challenges and our work have not stopped despite our past successes. In 2019, the legislature passed and Governor Reynolds signed a 6-week abortion ban, which was blocked by a district court. Then they passed and signed a 24-hour waiting period before an abortion law, which ended up in front of the Iowa Supreme Court, which reversed its own decision from just a few years earlier in favor of the unnecessary and insulting 24-hour waiting period, removing in the process that fundamental right to abortion, returning the undue burden standard. Nothing had changed between the 72-hour waiting period case and the 24-hour waiting period case, except the people serving on the court. And we should not forget that the change in personnel of our Supreme Court was initiated in part by the reaction to the court's 2009 marriage equality decision, which led to an organized and successful effort to convince Iowans to vote out 3 justices who were up for re-election. Following the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Dobbs this past summer, which overturned the undue burden standard of Roe v. Wade and made restrictions to abortion more federally permissible, Governor Reynolds asked the Iowa Supreme Court to revisit the district court's permanent injunction of that 6-week ban decision. Oral arguments will be held this April with our very talented, brilliant, I would say, legal director, Rita Bettis Austin, arguing our side. If the state wins this case, if the Supreme Court finds in favor of the 6-week ban, up to 98% of all abortions in Iowa will be eliminated. And even before the court's decision in that case, we expect the legislature will pass for the required second time a constitutional amendment to say that Iowans do not, in fact, have a right to an abortion. They want to put it in the Constitution. If this amendment passes this year or in next year's session, this amendment will be on the ballot for a vote of all Iowans, probably in November of 2024. So we will get to weigh in. Polling suggests that a majority of Iowans strongly support abortion rights. However, that's no guarantee that if the amendment does get to the ballot, it will be defeated. The other side's pretty organized, pretty dedicated. And that's why the ACLU of Iowa is taking this threat seriously by building a statewide network of volunteers to engage in their local communities and commit to voting against this amendment should it reach the ballot, as we expect it will. And then, as if existing threats to abortion access were not serious enough, an over 50-page anti-abortion bill was introduced earlier this week, making it clear, as if it weren't already obvious, that some top legislators in the Iowa legislature are seeking the absolute worst case scenario for reproductive rights in this state. They want a full abortion ban. We have to deduce that these legislators and our current governor won't stop until they have fully placed themselves between Iowans and their doctors. They're already trying to place themselves between transgender youth and their doctors. As Max said, what's keeping them from standing between any of us and our doctors? Why are we here? What happened? It's been challenging before, but why does it seem to be so bad, so much worse than ever before? As if this legislature simply can't seem to stop itself from attempting and succeeding in some cases of taking away rights. One of the reasons is the growing one-party control of this state government. The November 2022 election increased the legislative majorities in both the Senate and the House, and due to redistricting, more than 1/3 of the legislative seats are held by newly elected members. Along with the change in our Attorney General, we are in new territory for public policy in this state, and for our ability and the ability of our friends and partners to influence it on our key issues. The truth is that it is all but impossible for the ACLU of Iowa to help stop virtually any proposal in the legislature that leadership has greenlit. It used to be that we, along with our allies, could help prevent what we consider to be, from a civil rights and civil liberties perspective, the worst things from happening. But it could be very difficult for us to help pass our proactive priorities. But now we can stop very little on a defensive stance, even as we may still see some proactive measures move, because the ACLU, at least, is seen as a policy organization rather than a partisan one. We're trying to keep it that way. It's very challenging, though. Very challenging. But just so it's not all bad news today, because it is bad news, I do want to tell you about one proactive priority of ours that is still progressing, and that's our eviction expungement effort. And this is a matter that I think a lot of people don't know about, but it's important. Under current Iowa law, just the filing of an eviction against a tenant becomes a public record and stays on a person's record permanently, even if the eviction is thrown out. So you get evicted, even if it's not fair, it stays on your record forever. This public record of eviction raises a red flag every time a landlord or potential employer runs a check before renting to a person. The consequences of an eviction record disproportionately burden Black women and perpetuate social and economic inequities for people of color. Between 2012 and 2016, Black renters in Iowa were on average almost 5 times more likely than white renters to have evictions filed against them. Black women were 5.5 times more likely to have evictions filed against them than white renters in a similar financial situation. Many immigrant, low-income families who cannot access public benefits also continue to be disproportionately harmed. And evidence suggests that LGBTQ Iowans are also more likely to be involved in eviction proceedings. Eviction not only has devastating consequences, including job loss and homelessness, but also creates long-term barriers to obtaining safe and stable housing due to the permanent stigma associated with a prior eviction record. Well, because of these stark race and gender disparities in eviction filings in our state, evictions are both a racial and gender justice issue. This issue is not just limited to wrongful eviction filings. Even a lawful eviction for non-payment of rent virtually eliminates someone's ability to be accepted for safe, affordable housing in the future. So if you experience hard times once, that record of falling behind on your rent should not hang around your neck forever. Even a record of bankruptcy or foreclosure can be expunged after a certain amount of time, but that's not the case with missing just 1 month's rent under the current law. Permanent records of prior eviction filings, even if the accusation never resulted in an eviction, disproportionately harms Black tenants and Black women. These records result in situations that unfairly lock tenants out of housing opportunities without providing any chance to explain their circumstances or why they would be good tenants. Well, this is our 3rd year of working on a fix for this problem, and we feel that there's a good chance that we could get something done today this year with strong bipartisan support. The bill being considered would automatically seal any records when an eviction filing was dismissed for being unlawful. So if it wasn't fair that you got evicted, it gets off your record. If the tenant wins the case against them too, it gets off your record. An accusation against the tenant would no longer be enough to harm them forever. The bill also provides a second chance for people who were evicted for non-payment, but have since gotten back on their feet. It allows, once a certain period of time has passed, for a person to have their record sealed. We continue to think that passing this bill is within reach, and therefore, even in this challenging climate for civil rights and civil liberties, we can accomplish good things for people, regardless of state politics and partisanship and how bad it is in so many ways. And in almost every other way, the first few weeks of the session have been difficult and dispiriting. One of the lowlights that you've probably heard about for sure is the school voucher bill that passed and has now been signed into law. This is the measure that makes state taxpayer funds available for K-12 students who choose to attend private schools. We opposed because there's a significant difference between parents supporting a private or parochial school of their choice and the government doing so. Legal standards and protections on core ACLU issues are regularly lower in private schools than in public ones. Examples range from accessibility requirements for students with disabilities to possible disqualification from attending due to religious beliefs, gender identity, sexual orientation, and so on. We are concerned about the government obligating taxpayer dollars toward entities with more lax requirements to protect civil rights and civil liberties. And when the government explicitly exempts those recipient entities from being considered an agent of the government. Often when folks know that we have opposed a bill that becomes law, they ask if we plan to take legal action. I've gotten a lot of calls. Are you going to sue the state? And we do sue the state from time to time, for sure. But as a rule, for a variety of reasons, we never forecast our legal strategies. But I can tell you that our team is always paying attention and consulting with our national team of legal experts as we consider when and where we can have the most positive impact and when we should avoid taking action because it could actually make advancing civil rights and civil liberties more difficult. And I can also tell you that due to the generosity of our donors, we're totally supported by the people. We definitely don't get government grants because we're half the time we're suing the government. We are adding we have already added one, and we're adding a second attorney, bringing our legal team to 4 litigating attorneys for the first time in Iowa history, ACLU of Iowa history. And this plan was in place long before we realized how bad it was going to get. But if there was ever a time for us to be fully prepared to go into court, now's the time. So just want to assure you that because of our donors, maybe some of you are in the room, we are progressing even in this very difficult climate. I want to close by reflecting a little bit about the walkouts that you may have seen. So all across Iowa, there were walkouts in support of LGBTQ students and against some of the stuff happened at the legislature. It's always inspiring to me to see young people exercising their First Amendment rights, standing up for themselves, showing the folks at the legislature what the future looks like, even if it scares them. I hope it scares them. It gives me hope. It helped in a difficult week to see that. But I came across this blog post by a writer named Courtney Martin recently, and she captured the vision that the ACLU nationwide and so many of our supporters and friends are working to achieve. She's describing and relishing a children's program at her daughter's racially, economically, and academically diverse elementary school in inner city Oakland and what it portends for all Americans. And she writes, "I get to live in this America." She's talking about the kids in front of her, the diverse, in all ways, kids in front of her. "I get to live in this America, the version of our nation where we acknowledge that slavery is foundational to our history and that we are still in the process of understanding what that means, how to re-narrativize and repair, and that Black Americans have been instrumental in shaping some of the best features and flair of our democracy. This America, where my white kids are taught not that they are inherently bad, as some Americans at the moment would suggest, but that they are no better than anyone else. In fact, have both unearned privileges because of the color of their skin and an invitation to be part of a new season of whiteness where we tell more accurate truths and reinvest in community, grow stronger muscles for solidarity and the redistribution of opportunities, power, space, time, money. This America, where there has been and continues to be so much pain and also so much joy. This America, where that morning these kids will each have their turn in the spotlight, breakdancing, shout singing, forgetting their lines, smiling at their grandmothers. That's the thing that some people don't seem to understand these days," she says. "There's no way to redact or micromanage the American inheritance. Generational change cannot be censored or banned or burned. It's a light inside each one of these kids, as inevitable as the sun rising each day, cyclical, unstoppable. They will remake our nation by their very existence, whether you let them read the books that scare you or not. They will sing a new song and you won't be able to stop them because the lyrics are forming in real time, born from their collective genius, belted out from their lungs. Listen, and you will hear the future of this country thrumming sweetly under all the cacophony of adult fear. It's one of the most painful, sweetest songs I've ever heard." Amen to that. Roger Baldwin, the ACLU's first executive director, put it well when he said, "So long as we have enough people in this country willing to fight for their rights, we'll be called a democracy." As shameless as today's attacks on our civil rights and civil liberties are, they are merely the latest chapter in the generational pursuit of a more perfect union. It's not always easy to do this work, but it's always a privilege to serve our mission with all of our supporters and friends like you, to be positioned on the side of history that is more equitable, fair, and just. Thank you. Want to do Q&A or no? You have to be sure and repeat questions. So you bet. Okay, so I'm told this is a time for questions if anyone has any, and I'm happy to repeat questions that you raised so that we can make sure we get it on Zoom. Or comments. Yes, sir.
So you think marriage equality is safe right now?
The question is, do I think marriage equality is safe? I think the bill that's been introduced will not advance to become law. Is it safe? That's up to us.
But the law that Biden signed that protected equality, that meant people could had to be recognized across state lines, that protects existing marriage, but that also protects the future marriage.
I'm not a legal expert. I don't believe that the other side will stop until they have their way. Yeah. So the question was, does the law that Biden signed protect future same-sex marriage? And I don't have a good answer for that. But how I answered it was that I don't anticipate that the other side will stop. And when I say the other side, I'm not being partisan. I'm being particular. There are sides. Let's face it. Yes, sir.
I'm amazed at how blatantly theocratic language is in that marriage amendment proposed. They're basically saying marriage be restricted to cisgender heterosexual human beings because we believe that's what God wants.
Yeah.
The whole gist of the language. That won't go anywhere this session, but don't you think it's very likely to be back in next session?
It's hard to say. I don't put anything past. The question is, do I think if the marriage equality infringement bill, for lack of a better way to say it, which is referenced as having a lot of theocratic language in it, would come back again? And I don't know the answer to that question. I think the fact that it's introduced is troubling enough, given that we've had marriage equality in this state since 2009. Yes.
The answer is obvious about the inequality, and God forbid, if it got so far to think that what would happen to those of us who are married?
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, so I can't speak to that at the moment, and I don't know what the outcome would be. But I know that we won't stop fighting to protect that right to be married.
Certainly, there would have to be some grandfathered in retro reversing suit for already married. And I don't mean to be dismissive of those that want to still be married.
Yeah, of course. Mhm.
But you have to think.
Yeah.
After my whole life.
Absolutely. So the comment was about coming after there would have to be some kind of a grandfathering in of existing marriages. And I mean, these are great questions to ask your Iowa legislature, because they're the ones that are trying to infringe on your rights. Yes, sir.
Just amazing what they're going for. Interviewed Iowa State student graduates, less than 10% of them stay in the state. We just drove to Missouri this past weekend. Roads are absolutely crap. They're some of the worst bridges in the country. Our water is toxic. The farm around, this is the crap we're worried about. Which is amazing.
A comment about how bad things are in Missouri and how we're heading in that direction. Some would say we're becoming the Mississippi of the North. You know, I've been a Midwesterner my whole life, and Midwesterners are generally dismissive of the Deep South. But even 6 years ago, some of the abortion restrictions that we were facing here in Iowa were worse than the South. In fact, we were the first state in the country, I believe, to pass and sign a 6-week abortion ban. This is Iowa. You know, our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned earlier that the other side is very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So they what is your advice for better organization on our side?
Yeah. So the question is about how to be better organized on the side of rights and equality than the people who want to take away that rights and equality. And I would say you support the existing infrastructure that's here, One Iowa, Iowa Safe Schools, ACLU of Iowa, if you will, Planned Parenthood. And you mobilize in terms of reminding your neighbors what's at stake. I think, I don't know, my gut tells me that people are asleep. My gut I thought I'd start today by asking you how many of you know what's going on in the legislature, but I could get the sense that most of you do. This is not the crowd I need to ask that question to. I think most of the state doesn't even know what's going on up there. They're not paying attention. They don't, and because they may not know, or at least know that they know a transgender person, it's not affecting them. It's not impacting them. But it's impacting those of us with beating hearts and empathy. But if you're not paying attention, you don't even have a chance to get your heart engaged. So to Max's point, showing up, speaking up, particularly those of us who aren't transgender, matters. It matters right now. Even if these bills progress, it still matters that we push back. It's not a decisive answer. It's a difficult time in our state. I don't know. It may take longer to fix this than we want it to take. But I got to think that Iowans are going to come to their senses, wake up, whatever. I mean, they've got it. How many rights can be taken away before Iowans realize that their legislature is working against them?
How much of this that people don't care or don't know? I get the sense that in rural Iowa, they don't have newspapers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All they hear is right-wing radio. There's no messaging from the liberal side or those who protect our rights. Rural Iowa's in decline, and the school voucher bill is going to close their schools. Do you think the school closing is actually going to finally wake rural Iowa up?
Well, there was, I don't know how determinative it is. Polling is weird, but I did see a poll put out by Morningside College in the last week or so that said the majority of Iowans are not in favor of the school voucher bill. So to your point, he was asking about whether or not the school voucher bill could affect positive change in terms of mobilizing people who don't like that bill and other things that the legislature are trying to do. Maybe it is something that will help wake up rural Iowa to not just be reactively on one side of the political spectrum. I mean, you gotta, I believe that, you believe what you hear, and if all you hear is one side, you're going to tend to believe that. And I think thoughtful people want to know what both sides are saying. But again, I think it's, in this overwhelming information age where we just get pounded, I think it's easy to take the road that tells you what to believe and doesn't invite critical thinking. And I feel like some of the media in particular really kind of hones in on that lack of critical thinking. And it's a shame. And it's up to all of us to try to, create the antidote to that.
Part of that critical thinking, is being able to read.
Yeah.
And a good part of our population no longer can read above a sixth grade level. So we have to, there's some correlation there somewhere. I think you have a deeper understanding of civil rights and what to do. You have to read and then more complicated terms.
Yeah, so the comment had to do with being able to read, keeping you from being able to stand up for your rights. But I do think that there's a possibility for mobilization. I mean, it's kind of like that adage, when you start to see rights taken away and then suddenly yours are taken away, it gives you reason to care. And right now they're punching down because they can get away with it. And to Max's point, there's not been the kind of pushback. I mean, Lori Bellin in Bleeding Heartland did a really good piece just a day or two ago, kind of outlining all of the anti-LGBTQ bills, and in particular, the fact that the business community isn't really speaking up as they have in the past. And we, she doesn't discern why. She has some conjecture about why, but then maybe it's better to keep the legislature on their side, and not put, I don't know. It's disturbing though. And our governor is kind of leading the charge, and Iowans need to know that. Yes, Courtney Martin. And I should have done a footnote for myself so I could direct you to her blog. Maybe I can send to somebody the link, and then you can. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know how I got it. You know how Facebook is. Somebody posted it. And I was like, wow, this is great writing, and I'm totally down for it. So. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. Keep up the good fight. We're with you, and we're with all Iowans, as Neil said in the intro. No matter what you believe, no matter who you are, the ACLU is with you. But we're going to fight for civil rights and civil liberties more than we're going to fight for just flat out privilege. So that's our goal. That's what we do. We don't stop. We play the long game. We appreciate your support. Thank you.